Hey, welcome to another Talking Joe interview special with me, Mark. Today, I'll be talking to Robert Atkins.
All right, stop. Whatever you're doing, TJ's back, the airwaves we're chewing, rocking. A G.I. Joe podcast, interview special, questions will be asked. Will it ever stop? Yo, I don't think so, not as long as someone's publishing Joe. Artists, writers, G.I. Joe fanboys, let's get this thing started and hope we don't annoy our guest in the studio right now. They've come in for a chat discussing when, where and how. Probing. We're going in deep. Anything left, we might as well be asleep. Questioning them about the G.I. Joe history. Unwrapping answers like a whodunit mystery. TJ interview. TJ interview. TJ interview.
Hey, welcome to another Talking Joe interview special with me, Mark. Today, I'm talking to G.I. Joe artist Robert Atkins. Robert has worked as a penciler, inker, and colorist in the comic industry for a number of years. He studied at Savannah College of Art and Design, where he earned a master's in Sequential Art and now teaches there himself. He is best known for his work on IDW's relaunch of G.I. Joe and the subsequent Snake Eyes series. But other work includes Amazing Spider-Man, Venom, Heroes for Hire, Ultimate Fantastic Four, and The Savage She-Hulk for Marvel Comics, Legion of Superheroes for DC Comics, and Forgotten Realms for DDP. He creates art for toy packaging and for various companies and brands, including NERF, Marvel Legends, and Star Wars. He is the co-creator of a comic series called Elders of the RuneStone. Most recently, he's been doing the penciling for the Snake Hunt arc of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero that we've been talking about on the main show. And today's interview is a little bit of a deep dive into his work on Snake Hunt. So sit back, relax, and listen to the chat with Robert.
As soon as you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, of course. I love podcasts. I love being a part of it. And of course, I don't know, just consuming G.I. Joe as much as I like being a part of it. And then so I was like, all right, a new G.I. Joe podcast. So I went and listened to the last few episodes you guys have done. And oh my gosh, right. I was just cracking up. You guys are awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, what I wasn't expecting was the musical component.
It's probably the most important part of the show.
Yeah, the little jingles and intros and outros and the little bumpers. That was definitely a surprise. That was really good. That makes it a unique show for sure.
Cool. So have you got any sort of deadlines of when you've got to be doing something else today?
Yeah, no, I'm fairly open kind of for the rest of the afternoon. That's kind of why we kind of lucked out for me to be able to record today. So really short of me taking my son to get a haircut later, I think we're pretty open, really.
Yeah, you're lucky. We can't even do that anymore.
Oh gosh, I know, everything is so wild, and it's even in the U.S. it's different from state to state.
Yeah.
It's strange, yeah.
Because you're in Savannah now, is that right?
Yeah, we're just outside of Savannah, Georgia, and of course, there's all kinds of caution, and people are aware. But our family is in Illinois, the Midwest, kind of central of the country area. And, me and my wife, we both kind of grew up in the same town back in Illinois.
Oh, right.
And there has been a big hot spot. And the governor, the local kind of government there has been just really locked down tight on everything. So a lot of restaurants closed, a lot of public businesses and that kind of stuff has been closed down a lot longer. A lot of virtual school, stuff like that. Whereas here, it feels like a different country. It feels like a whole different culture. And I'm like, I'll go to the store and I'm just like the only person wearing a mask. And I look around, I'm like, you guys are insane. I'm like, what's going on? It's just, it's a much more rural area. Not in downtown Savannah. Certainly in Savannah, people are very conscientious. It's more as you get to the outskirts of town and in the more rural areas. And I just think it's like they're just not as affected by it. And so it's not as on their mind. They don't really see it. It's not a part of their lives. And so they think this doesn't really apply to me, So it's just strange. So we actually did, just by chance, we happened to see some family from Illinois around Christmas time. It was interesting talking to them about how different that life was, even in the same country, just from one area to the other. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
wild.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, sort of just, in terms of what is and isn't allowed, and, regardless of people's necessary attitudes to it, it could be sort of poles apart in terms of, well, even in the UK, they had sort of different tiers of restrictions, but now we're back in a lockdown where, in theory, we're not meant to be going out doing anything much at all apart from the essentials, and they've for the most part shut schools, and so we've got to be back homeschooling again. So
Wow, yeah.
that's a whole load of fun when you're meant to be doing your own job during so it's tricky.
Yeah. Well, and my wife, she teaches elementary school, so like third grade. Basically 8 or 9 year olds here. And I'm kind of teaching full time as a professor, at university at the Savannah College of Art and Design. So that's keeping me, as far as like full time work. So we're like certainly right in the middle of trying to figure out how to teach in the middle of all this. So we switched to kind of virtual learning back in April, and we've been doing that since. So we've been all kind of teaching from home, and our kids, trying to learn from home, all last spring and through the summer. Our kids went back to school based in the area we're at. Everybody just went back to school where we're at. The teachers were required to wear masks, but the kids weren't. And I'm like, well, what's the point? But, oh gosh.
Oh dear.
So it's been bizarre, but but we've been teaching virtually, at least in the colleges since then. So all my classes have been online.
Okay. So probably quite a learning curve to kind of shift to that different dynamic of being at the front of the class and being able to see everybody and their reactions and all the rest of it, versus just doing it on doing it remotely.
It is. Before I taught at Savannah College of Art and Design, we call it SCAD down here. So before teaching down here, I taught with the Comics Experience, which was it's not so much like a collegiate teaching school as much as just a program. It's run by Andy Schmidt, who was the editor for IDW. He edited at Marvel Comics for 7-8 years. He edited like the Civil War story, Secret Invasion, and Annihilation, a bunch of big crossover events for Marvel. And then he went to IDW and edited all the Hasbro related books, so G.I. Joe and Transformers for a number of years. So that's how I got to know him.
So he did Civil War at Marvel, and then he did G.I. Joe Civil War
yeah.
IDW.
Hey, wait a minute. Yeah. I don't think that was his idea, but it just happened to be. Yeah, he happened to be the guy behind it. It's like, this thing keeps following me around. Anyway, so he was running Comics Experience, and so we did everything virtually there. So I was actually used to teaching online.
Okay.
To a certain extent. Like we would hold like a video class back then through like Adobe Connect and GoToMeeting and stuff like that software, where I'd hold like a weekly meeting, and through online forums I'd give assignments and answer them and critique work, but it wasn't like accredited, it wasn't graded, it's not like they got a degree, but they were able to learn about like the comics industry and production and stuff like that. I did that for about 7 years, and then started teaching down in Savannah about 3 years ago. Full time. So I was kind of just doing that on the side with my freelance comics and video game and toy package art, like illustration work, and then kind of flip-flopped. Now I teach full time, and then I just kind of do the comic stuff as I can fit it in.
Right. Does that mean a lot of kind of weekends and evenings, and does it sort of slot in a little bit more sociably than that?
Nope, it's really weekends and evenings. I really wish. So you nailed it. So it's interesting to kind of touch on G.I. Joe specifically. I had actually been talking to IDW about maybe doing some more G.I. Joe work in winter of 2018. Because we were going to pitch either a one-off graphic novel, or maybe starting up some kind of a G.I. Joe yearbook or annual, and we had some ideas for that. And as we pitched it, we really liked the ideas, and I think that it got some traction. At the time, there were some other editors there that all was kind of switched over, but they came back and said, Well, the reason why I was pitching a one-off, like an annual or a yearbook or something, it was just because I knew my schedule,
Okay.
Because I was teaching full time. I, didn't really have
to
time
give you a bit of a breathing space to do it rather than having to hit a monthly, same sort of monthly deadline.
Yeah. So, and they came back and they're like, well, instead of that, how about doing like this big 10-issue event where we throw in every character that's ever lived? And I was like, what? It's like, who made that promise and why? Why would you do that? And so I was like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, there was a few, there were certainly a few things that my previous run with IDW, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I just absolutely love the property. It's always hard for me to say no to G.I. Joe. It's just something I grew up on, and I always want to be a part of any opportunity I get. So I was like, a few things I didn't really get a chance to do with my previous run on G.I. Joe was ever get to work on a real American hero, like the kind of the main canon series. And I didn't get to work on a monthly book with Larry. I have worked with Larry a couple times before, but on non-G.I. Joe related projects.
Okay.
And
what was that?
So there was a book called Shadow Gambit a while back, I think in 2012, 2013. Somebody else had wrote the plot. He was scripting it, like adapting the plot. He was scripting it, and then I was penciling it. It was like a kind of a standalone graphic novel. So it wasn't through a major publisher. It was like self-published. And that was fun. It was kind of an action adventure series, or just like a standalone graphic novel. But I did the majority of that book. It's what I did basically right after I left the Snake Eyes Storm Shadow series back then. So, this for all of that was really appealing to me. So this was in January of 2019 when they approached me about it. And I was like, wow, I really want to do that. But I immediately said, I was like, look, this is, it's a monthly book. I do have a full-time job here. In theory, I was like, if you get me the script right away, and if I can get going on this, I can get a good head start. I could potentially do it, but we might need to bring somebody else, for me to like alternate with, or I might have to adjust either my style a little bit or something like that for me to be able to keep up. And they're like, no, yeah, we just want you on, and like, we'll work with you on it. And I was like, okay. So then that was January of 2019. But I never really got a date as far as when it was going to come out. And I didn't, and I'd been picking up the trade, so I actually wasn't aware of like what issue had just come out, so I wasn't even sure where they were at. And I didn't get a script. I was like, it was about April, and I'm like, guys, I really need, when is this supposed to come out? I haven't heard anything. And they're like, well, we're just waiting on a script, and as soon as we get it, we'll get it to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, man. And I'm just thinking, this is eating up all that lead time that I thought I would have. And so I finally got a script in May, and they're like, all right, great. If you can have this issue by June, this is supposed to come out in July. And I was like, what? I was like, that's impossible. In May is, finals, right at the end of the semester, for college. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was running a huge event for the school, so I'm putting in overtime at my job on top of like,
oh no,
trying to do a full-time job of drawing this comic. So I realized, okay, if I'm going to do this book, a couple of things are going to have to happen. One, normally we draw comics 11 by 17, just the size paper we draw on, and I've done the commission I did for you, right? That Firefly. Yeah. So that size board, right? We draw that size so that we can get all the detail in and
shrink it down,
right? So it looks a bit more, I don't know, one, we're not killing ourselves to get the detail in there, but also it just helps it look a bit more refined and nuanced and things. For the amount of time it takes to do those pages, I just started drawing it like 1-to-1 size. So I was literally drawing it the size of the book. So
it's incredible.
That's the only way. It's interesting to look at, and I think after we chat today, I'll email you some of the penciled pages from those issues.
That'd be cool,
it'd be kind of interesting to look at, because the other aspect too is I called in my brother, who is also an artist, and he inked a lot of my work throughout the series, who we have a similar style, but he has a much cartoonier style than I do. And I think it was probably those two factors that kind of led to the work looking slightly different than probably what most people were used to, with me on the book.
Maybe not as much. I mean, you're obviously in your own style, 24/7, but it didn't look to me jarring, and I would never have guessed it was drawn a 1-to-1 scale until I saw that you'd posted about that online. So it was quite a surprise. But I guess with it being inked digitally, is my guess, that I guess that means that Brian would then have an opportunity to sort of zoom in and sort of refine some of the detail at a sort of slightly larger scale, as it were.
Yeah, and in fact, you could go to, and not that I keep it regularly updated, but if you go to my my blog, it sounds like 10 years ago. If you go to my, I just posted it recently just because I almost use it more like an image hosting site than anything else because it's easy to link to. But if you just go to robertatkinsart.blogspot.com, there's a recent post there I put up just a couple days ago of just some of the penciled pages actually. And all of those are drawn, basically A4 size paper. So 9x12 or 8, letter size. And so I do still get in there and I tend to draw small, which is basically the only way that allows me to even do this, at a reduced size. And as you say, like I would scan it in at a high resolution, and so I'd scan it in at like 600 DPI, and I knew that I could drop it down to 400 DPI and then immediately up the dimensions, and it wouldn't lose its resolution. So what I was sending to my brother was the equivalent of an 11x17 400 DPI image.
Sure.
And then when he went in to digitally ink it, that was the thing, was I was trusting him to go in and know my style of rendering to, refine it to a certain extent and feather out as smooth as he could, that kind of stuff with the inking.
And I guess I was watching a video that you had posted while you're sort of chatting along as you were penciling, and I guess your style helps in terms of that you do work with a very, when you're doing a penciling stage, a very fine point, and it's very tight to begin with. I know that a lot of pencilers sort of work with a softer, larger pencil, and it's a little bit looser in the pencil stages. So it's almost a drawing to begin with that you could kind of just darken the lines, and you're looking quite close to an inked finished.
I know, to
product.
my detriment, really, and to the detriment of my deadlines, to be honest. I think a lot of that came from when I started at Devil's Due, right? Who had the licensing rights to G.I. Joe before IDW had it. It was right at that time, from 2004 to 2006. Like, comics went through this like really horrible like growing pains where they kind of didn't want to have inkers. And you could scan at a high enough resolution. Like if you drew and you penciled tight enough, they thought, hey, we could just not pay an inker and we'll bump up the contrast and we'll try and color it. And it all looked horrible. It all looked like muddy and kind of washed out.
I think they did that like as you say, at the end of the Devil's Due run of books when they were doing that World War III art.
Yes. Yeah.
I think they did that then.
Yeah, it was like that when I did fill-ins for like this. This is my very first work, so it's really, don't go find it, but it's like the worst. But it's like Snake Eyes Declassified and some of the Dreadnoks Declassified books, and so it was a lot of that, So, but that forced me in my very early stages of my career to pencil incredibly tight because we didn't have an inker. So I had to make it reproducible. I had to make every line basically like an inker. And one, it helped me in my inking. It helped me become a better inker, but also, it's more time consuming, and it just ingrained in me that kind of bit of an OCD approach to just penciling and keeping everything crazy tight.
Because I think as well, Shannon Gallant works at times on a smaller board, and knowing that his inker can kind of, I guess, smooth out some of the imperfections when it's blowing up as part of just the process of, that's my job, get the page down and on, and the idea is there, and your job is to isn't to just trace it, but also guess enhance at the same time, smooth out the edges, as I say.
Yeah, and honestly, that's where I gotten the idea. I'd seen some of his pages, and I thought at first and not at all, like, I don't mean this as a derogatory, like they didn't look finished, but I was like, I thought they were layouts at first because they were smaller. And I was like, you do the craziest, tightest layouts. He's like, dude, those are my finished pages. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I was like immediately apologizing because I didn't want him to think I implied that they weren't finished. But I was like, no, these are beautiful. I didn't know what to say. I was like, But he, I didn't realize. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, you can draw it smaller, and you don't have to be so inanely detailed with every line you put down. And that's what an inker is there for. Honestly, that's the inker's job, is to finish the art. You're there to collaborate, and it's their job to go in and to focus on the line, to give it texture and detail and depth, and you're there to work together. So it was nice. It was awesome to kind of work with my brother. That was a lot of fun to work on a book together, and he helped a lot. So but in the end, it was great to collaborate. I knew going into it that working with him, because of the process, it was going to change the style slightly. But there are elements of it. I felt like it had been a while too since I had been on a regular monthly book, and there were aspects of it, pages of it, that I felt like I was more proud of, and I kind of found my voice in certain aspects of the arc more than others. But anyway, it was interesting to be back on it for sure.
And was that the first time that you had worked with your brother in that same sort of combination to produce finished art like that?
We had done a few other covers. He has a book that he's done on Kickstarter called Final Street, that's published and going to be published through Source Point Press coming up.
Okay.
So they've had successful Kickstarters. I've done the covers for those, and I did a few fill-in issues for X for Dark Horse that we worked together on, and I'm trying to think what else. I mean, a few projects here or there, we've done together, just because we previously we lived fairly close together, like within about an hour and a half drive of each other. So if I was ever tight on a deadline, he'd come up and help me finish it. But only recently, this project was certainly the largest, kind of most extensive thing we did together.
Cool, yeah, and it was the plan from quite early on in the process that you knew that to get it to work, he'd be a good trusted pair of hands to help you deliver the project, and that you have the confidence in that he knew how to interpret your pencils into the finished inks.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, when I got that script, we had to turn it around pretty quickly, and we were kind of on our heels. So I did those first two issues, 266 and 267. And then
it was alternating every other, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then it was every other one. So I did 6 of the issues of the run, and Netho did 4. And then right towards the end, Netho came in too, just to kind of help with that last issue, just because of schedules. But
a few of the final pages, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it was oh man, the whole thing was just such a ride. It was so oh gosh, it was it was very interesting working with Larry again. So even just kind of wrapping my head around working with the way that he scripts, because he scripts stories so differently. It's kind of an old school way of doing it, the Marvel
so they sort of
style.
Describe the kind of the Marvel method for Larry. So how would his scripts look, and how would that compare to what you were used to from someone like Chuck Dixon?
Yeah, it's interesting using Chuck as an example, because he's he was one of the most prolific and one of the easiest writers that I've had to work with. So Chuck would lay out a script that was literally, page 1, and then would say next to it how many panels there are. And then down the left, it would say panel 1, panel 2, through panel 5, or however many. And then it would, by each panel, it would lay out the panel description and then the full dialogue, exactly what's being said, and any sound effects. Chuck was also brilliant at, not strictly going into crazy detail as far as what camera angles to use or what size of panel. Occasionally he would mention if it was very important to the plot, or if he had a great suggestion, but he was really hands off on giving a ton of visual direction.
Sure, yeah.
Which is great, because it allows the artist to feel confident in doing what they were hired to do, quite honestly. Yeah. There are some scripts where I work with writers that get a little too verbose and a little too descriptive visually, and I'm like, I'll take that as a suggestion, thanks,
Yeah.
But you almost have to wade through that to actually find out what's happening in the script,
It's like I heard Alan Moore, I've read some of his scripts as well, that he'll potentially write a few pages just showing a particular panel, but then most normally will conclude, but if you've got a better way of doing this, just do that.
I know, and then you're left with that decision I'm supposed to sit here and tell Alan Moore how to do it right? It's like, oh gosh. So yeah, I kind of put you in a weird corner where so you have to make that decision. Well, all right, if I'm not going to do this, you have to come up with something better. And whereas you could just instead read the description and then let your visual thoughts, you'll come up with the best decision, instinctually or naturally. That's probably about the easiest method in general. It's the easiest method to follow, probably the most efficient time efficient as well. And then the second version we just described is probably the most difficult because you have to like wade through. Like I said, you have to kind of wade through that. Right in the middle, and more probably the most challenging, not difficult, but just the most creatively challenging is this Marvel method, because what you get is a paragraph, sometimes even a sentence, like literally a sentence that says, describes what's going to happen on the page. The basic plot. It's called a plot style script or Marvel method of scripting, where you would just get a paragraph description. These major events happen on the page. Occasionally, you might get some sample dialogue, or somebody might think this to give you some direction. And generally, you could even think of it like each sentence in that paragraph could be considered its own panel. Sometimes it's that straightforward, but not always. And ultimately, it's up to you as the artist to break down the story flow, how many panels, the pacing, the rhythm, the body language, the facial expressions, and the whole time you have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why it's so difficult. And so it kind of adds that extra little bit of appreciation for literally every artist that's ever worked on G.I. Joe, like with Larry. And then when you see G.I. Joe work, you're like, wow, like that, they're doing, they're doing the best they can. Now, the other thing, I'm not here to throw Larry under the bus. Like he's phenomenal at what he does. And he has his fun little quirks, and you guys acknowledge it on your podcast, which I love, his little Hamma-isms, But you have to give him a credit. One thing he is phenomenal at is he'll get that art, and then he crafts the story. Sure. So he's able to just kind of roll with it and make it work and add dialogue to the facial expressions that you draw. And for the most part, it makes sense. And for the most part, it's endearing, and it connects, and it brings in past history and pushes plot lines forward and makes each character feel unique and individual. Now it's a lot to juggle, and hopefully you have editors that are really on point and know the lore and can help them along. In a perfect world, then it would be seamless and you don't have any of the goofs, right? But but then we wouldn't have anything to comment on when we do our podcast.
Exactly.
So
what would we have to talk about?
Exactly. So in this process, it just took me a little bit to kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is a whole different headspace artistically to figure out, So
because you're I guess much more than as the G.I. Joe artist on over a Larry script, a much more active collaborator, because you're potentially going to be making quite different choices in the way you interpret that versus another artist, but perhaps who's feeding from the same script, because you're making all of these choices about what appears on the page, how it's laid out, how the characters are interacting, responding, what sort of expressions they might be having on their face, and then Larry will feed off of that in terms of then the eventual dialogue that lands on the page, and potentially even inform the way that the story progresses, because I guess he'll be able to see, okay, that was an interesting expression that character was displaying on that particular scene. What could that mean, and what could that foreshadow, and how will I use that in the next issue? Maybe
it's always a treat when I get the issue afterwards and I read it, and I was like, well, that's not the expression I was intending, but man, that's what he wrote. Or he nails it. It's really interesting. And the other thing too is I think it would be phenomenal for fans to be able to read the scripts after the fact to see what he changes. Or the other strange thing is like the nuances of the details that he does include. So even like back for 266, when you have that kind of strange training sequence at the beginning.
Oh yeah.
It could have been any kind of a layout. It could have been in any kind of scene or scenario, but the people that were chosen were very specific. It's throwdown against all these female characters, and then he specifically said they're on these geometric pylons, and I was like, what?
Okay.
I was like, why that of all things? I'm like, all right. So I'm sitting here trying to draw this, And then he's very specific about the weapons they have. And then I thought it was hilarious because I've never heard any. It's awesome because as I was listening to your podcast, like there are things that you guys pointed out that I haven't heard anybody else point out. I was like, oh my gosh, you guys nailed it. Because like, why does Scarlet? How did she put it? She had a nubbin on the end of her butt. On the end of her crossbow. He's like, I was like, why does she have some non-lethal version? But then like, others are gonna just try and slice Sean in half if they get a chance. I was like, what is going on? And he's got a sword, but anyway. And I think Jinx has something kind of wrapped on the end of her bladed staff, but not, really anything. It looks like saran wrap. That wasn't drawn very well. But,
okay, I get it. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting.
I see it now. You're talking about it, but at the time, I think I just thought it was like motion blur.
Oh, sure,
but
yeah,
I get it. Okay.
Well, and I don't even know if I haven't looked at it in a while, but so there are things that I might intend in the penciling, and it might not quite. We try to communicate as best as we can, but it might not quite get interpreted that way in the inks, and then once it's like playing telephone, it might once again not get interpreted by the time it gets to the colorists.
Yeah.
And then it's every single step of the process it might get interpreted differently, and then sure enough, that's how you get all of these either miscolorings or things that end up happening, but. Yeah, so there's these things. Oh, another thing I remember you pointed out was Sean's sword. And so I did very specifically try to draw a new sword, just with a bit of a new arc, a slight costume change. I kept asking, I was like, is there a specific uniform you want me to draw for him? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, we definitely want a more commando approach as opposed to like the ninja visor approach. And I was like, all right. I was like, but what are you using recently? And I just was not getting much direction, to be honest. And so I did something, and I was like, is it okay if I introduce a new kind of sword look? And they're like, yeah, definitely do it. And they said, actually, go ahead, because we'll make a big point to point out that sword in the next issue. I was like, okay, so I did it. And then again, just a slight miscommunication. I sent all the reference to Netho, and he just drew some like regular katana sword. And I'm like, no. Yeah. Like, no. Dang it. So then going forward, every time I drew the sword, I drew it the way I was drawing it. And then every time he drew the issues, he drew the sword he was drawing. I'm like, dang it. This is why we communicate. Oh, so, inevitably, that kind of stuff's going to happen. For the most part, communication was really good through the whole event. About as good as you can hope for, really. But those kinds of... Did
you actually speak with Netho, or was it emails?
Mostly emails. He's in Brazil. And while he certainly speaks English, it's very, I do think a few things, occasionally might get lost a little bit in translation. And I mean, he communicates perfectly fine, but I do think in general, there was just a slight disconnect occasionally. And whenever he needed help, I was always sending him pages, or if I needed to know what happened on the previous issue, he was really quick, and often we were sending stuff back and forth faster than the editors could keep up.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And we had phenomenal editors, to be honest. Like Tom and Megan were super, super helpful. And so we were all really supportive of each other, trying to do our best to keep it together and keep stuff on time as best as we could. It was just kind of a lot to coordinate.
That's an interesting point about you saying, how good the editors were and how helpful they were, because I think sometimes when things slip through or something happens that I guess the fans don't particularly like, it's sort of the editors that get pointed at, saying they should have picked it up and or maybe sort of reined Larry in a bit. Can you give any examples of kind of the things that they did in that process that worked particularly well, and picked up things or sort of just helped the process along? Because I think they probably do get knocked, and it's us just as fans only seeing the end product, we have no idea of the kind of the role that they actually play.
Oh gosh, yeah, they get a lot of stick. They do. It in general, one, knowing just what I know about IDW in general, it's a much smaller operation than I think most people realize. So if you go to San Diego, if you go to their offices, it's in general not an incredibly large space. You have really, I think in total, maybe 8 to 10 editors tops for the entire publishing company, handling the sheer number of production, the books that are getting put out. You have like a very small design team, 3 to 4 people that are pre-pressing every book, lettering most of the books. and you have like 1 to 2 guys in the back packing all the boxes.
Right.
And getting things shipped out, not obviously for all their distribution, but for all of their like comp copies for creators and for, whatever, advertising, marketing. And then you have a few editors that are there for special projects. And of course you have your editor-in-chief and senior editor. And in general, each of them are juggling anywhere from, 4 to even up to 8 to 10 books a month. Now, not that each one of those are coming out every month, but that are in current production, between current monthly titles, which are the most labor intensive, to collected editions, special projects, or larger things that aren't necessarily currently being drawn, but like the big special edition things, that need to be managed, right? And then whenever you add into that, it's a licensed property that everything that's drawn has to then go through the editor, then through an approval process with Hasbro, then back through the editor, then get collected and do the printer and out. It's just a lot of work, right? So so it just means that you have to put, as an editor, you have to put a lot of trust into your creators to basically know what they're doing and to be managing just canon and content as best as they can. Ultimately, yes, it is their job to be, making sure that everything's tight in continuity, right? And that dead characters don't accidentally show up on a bus. Which, so the other aspect is, I think it's funny you mentioned reining in Larry. And this isn't just IDW. I remember stories back at Devil's Due. It's just Larry is Larry. And I don't know that you can rein him in to a certain extent. It's very difficult. So he's on record all the time as just saying like, well, I don't even know what the next story is, Yeah. And he like takes pride in that, I was just like, what? Like, how do you? So and I'm just kind of like, we're just trying to well, that's why my first 3 or 4 covers were all homage covers, is because I was like, well, what's the story about? I want to do a story specific cover. They're like, we don't know. We don't know yet. And they're like, just do some homage. And I was like, all right. So that first cover where Cobra Commander was throwing the dice, that was kind of like an old homage to where I forget the cover number, where they're playing chess with kind of like the Joe figures. Sure, yeah. So I just thought some kind of like, kind of game piece or game board, and then I thought, well, it's Snake Hunt, so I could do the snake eyes on the dice, and so that kind of came to mind. And then again, you two were the only ones who caught it. Is that was really Snake Eyes in disguise as Flint, right? Yeah. And then you're like, I love that you guys said, well, maybe that's Sean in disguise as Stalker. Yeah. So that was really just an inside joke with a friend of mine, because I one time did a print for just a local comic shop that wanted to do like an exclusive print. And so I did a G.I. Joe just a print, big group shot, and I had Flint in the background and with the group. And we sent it to the colorist. It wasn't my colorist, to somebody they picked, but they colored in Flint as a black guy. Oh. And I was like, wait, did they think that was Stalker? And he doesn't have a mustache, right? It's just because he had a beret on, and so I guess this colorist doesn't know G.I. Joe at all. So anyway, so I was talking to that store owner, and I was like, hey, I did this homage cover where instead of Flint, I did Stalker. I swapped him out on the cover. And then I thought it was funny too, because that was like Snake Eyes impersonating Flint, and then we had Sean. And then I said that kind of as a joke to the store owner. I was like, oh, this is actually Sean impersonating. Oh, wow. And we had that joke. And then you guys totally said it on the podcast. I was like, I never thought anybody would make that connection. I thought it was just a silly inside joke between me and this other guy, and you guys called it out. Anyway. Fantastic. So weird.
So that makes sense now. So that was where you had the homage covers, and then sort of
sure.
Going forward after that, it was part 5 was the Secret of the Sludge cover, but I think that might have been the end of the homages.
Yeah,
I'm forgetting something.
It was from that point on. I asked if I could do other characters or if I could do story specific stuff, and they're like, just do Snake Eyes covers. And I was like, Well, I'd like to do other things, and I did one where I think I had Scarlet and Dawn, and I tried to throw in as many Vipers as I could, just kind of all attacking at once. And they're like, "Well, Hasbro likes this, but they just wanted you to draw Snake Eyes doing more flips." And that was really what they came. I was like, word for word, they came back and said. I was like, okay, and which was fun, and I love drawing Snake Eyes. Like I can never get tired of it, but it was just kind of funny.
Very
yeah,
good.
so. I didn't. So we never quite knew, as far as an editor working with Larry, you're going to get the script when he's ready to send it in, and you kind of don't know what's coming down the pike. So that was one of the things where they're like, well, we promised that we're going to have every living Joe. And I was like, and a few dead ones. And because we would get a script, and I was like, I don't think Crazy Legs is still alive. And, but there he is on the script over and over again.
Okay.
And then there was once or twice I was just going down the list. I have a huge list of people to put on a bus or whatever, or in the background of a pit scene or something like that. And I'm just looking up reference to make sure I draw them correctly, and I'm submitting it, and not even thinking twice. Like, oh wait, are they still alive? Sometimes. And then I'm also kind of trusting. Oh, my editors are giving this a once over, and for the most part they do, and they would catch it. But like I'm mentioning, not just to make excuses, but generally, they're busy also. Yeah. And I'm positive. I know for a fact early on, one or two slipped through because we heard about it.
Yeah, there was. I think there was. What did we have? Crankcase, Heavy Metal, and Crazy Legs made it through.
Yeah. So after that happened, we got Diana Davis, who's a good friend. She's really active on a lot of the G.I. Joe forums and Facebook and the boards. And she knows Larry really well from all the conventions. And just kind of a vocal fan. I think IDW, I don't exactly know how the contact was made, whether it was IDW reached out to her or she offered her services. But at any rate, we got a bit of a fan consultant, which was phenomenal. So somebody who had the time was willing to do it. And as soon as Larry had a script, we would forward it to her. She would give it a once-over to make sure that there weren't any dead Joes. And inevitably, she was like, okay, well, this Joe is dead. And she would be like, Robert, here are 3 options of people who have either similar specialities or we haven't seen yet, you could throw in and use, and so that was incredibly helpful. So
cool.
So we were able to tighten it up a little bit, for the second half of this series.
And that got introduced, about halfway through Snake Hunt, did it?
Yeah, I think so. It was probably by the 4th or 5th issue or whatever.
There was another good one which I was going to ask you about, which is there's a scene with all of the Dreadnoks, and I do wonder what was on the page, whether the description was basically just all the Dreadnoks and you just filled it in, or whether there was a list of people to include. But one of the Dreadnoks there was Zanya, which was the Zartan's daughter that was introduced in the Devil's Due continuity, and in her first appearance in this issue in the Real American Hero continuity, in the letters pages, Larry makes a point that any characters introduced in other continuities that weren't created by him are not part of his universe, which is somewhat ironic. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear about that one.
So that's so I don't think so. Yeah, in the script it says it's a trailer full of Dreadnought. And so then, from me coming from like getting to work on the Devil's Due stuff, I got to work on Dreadnoks Declassified and a lot of these characters who I really enjoyed. And I have kind of heard Larry say that before. I thought, I wonder if I sneak him in, or if I sneak her in, if anybody's going to notice this. And so far, I mean, fans certainly have, and they've asked me about it, and I was like, well, in the script it just said Dreadnoks, and I was like, well, all right. So I don't, to be honest, unless Larry brings it up, I'm not going to talk about it. But
yeah, I mean, she's not addressed by name, so not to say that it is the same character from the other continuity. It could just be,
yeah, he didn't. I'm sure he saw the art as it came in. He didn't mention it, and he doesn't give her any dialogue, so he probably still doesn't acknowledge it, I'm sure, if you asked him.
Well, yeah, I mean, he makes a point of saying that he doesn't read G.I. Joe as written by other creators, so it's, I guess, conceivable that he might not have read those Devil's Due issues.
Oh,
And I
I'm
mean,
sure,
she does. She does appear on the front cover as well to that issue, I think, on the variant from John Royal. So it's if you hadn't noticed it in the issue, you'd certainly notice it from the variant cover.
Oh
but
man, that's great.
He does his own thing. That isn't necessarily loyal to what's going on in the inside of the book anyway.
Well, that's true. Yeah, but yeah. So there was that, and then there's another kind of little thing I snuck in with the character Hot Sauce. I don't know if you're familiar with.
Yeah, I saw you posting about this guy.
Yeah, so he's kind of our own little kind of background, creator-owned G.I. Joe character that we've kind of thrown in throughout the years. And so whenever I have a nice big group of G.I. Joe characters, I always give him a cameo just for the fun of it. But I know after these issues came out, like especially right after they came out, I'd get messages and emails from a lot of my friends and fans. Who's this person on this page? And all this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I have to go back and find. I forget. It was fun overall. There was a lot of characters. I had never had a chance to draw the October Guard before. There was a number of characters I hadn't. This was kind of my first chance just to get to draw them on the page. That was a lot of fun. Because I did my initial bus scene, and then of course I think Netho came in and did his bus, and then from that point, because I think my initial bus scene had a few people on it that shouldn't have been, and then
Right.
and it kind of revised as we went, and so our little behind the scenes conversation was maybe some people got kicked off the bus, and didn't make it, to Springfield.
Oh, dear.
And then I was like, because
Left it
Lady
there.
J's on the bus.
Uh-huh.
When they leave the Utah base, she's on the bus, but then she's parachuting down to the to the roof, and they're like, wait a minute, they're like, well, maybe they dropped by the airport. I was like, what?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No prize. You're coming up with your own no prizes here.
I know.
In real
Well,
time.
man, then I could tell you a few. There's ones that we were kind of catching on the way that we're just like, trying to put out fires of whenever you have to do a group scene like this, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what to say. You know what I mean? We had. I don't want to sit here and like complain about a project that I got a chance to work on, but I'm a fan of it too. Where I was excited to be on a project where the idea of drawing every living Joe like excited me.
Sure.
But I didn't want to draw every living Joe sitting on a bus. And then like literally never getting off the bus. I was like, what? So there was a few aspects of the story that I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, to be honest. And
Sure.
I'm sure like a lot of people. So it's not. It was fine for a story. There were some aspects of the logistics that I wish could have been different. There was aspects of the process I wish could have been different, and a few aspects of the story itself that I'm happy I got a chance to work on it. And there were some moments that I couldn't have been happier about. But yeah, certainly there were some things that I wish could have been a bit different too. But it's like that with just about every project, to be honest.
And in those in the big scenes like the bus scenes where you do have to draw an awful lot of Joes, in those circumstances you were generally working from a list of named Joes of who to include in each scene. It wasn't random characters that you were magicking up out of your own imagination. It was generally including the people that you were directed to.
Yeah, Larry definitely had a very specific list for each of those like bus 1, these are the people on bus 1, and bus 2, these are the people there, and then these were the people that were in the command suburban, these are the people who were the tactical kind of parachute drop that were infiltrating in. And so there were all these separate divisions. These were the Air Chicago team that were infiltrating from the hospital, and through this kind of tunnel system. Yeah. So it was, all of that was kind of the concept of it, kind of infiltrating from these multiple areas I thought was interesting. I liked the idea of like the camaraderie of like, we're going all in, people like, I'm here to basically put in for leave, the idea, like we're going all in for this guy, like that was great. I loved the camaraderie of it. The showing different teams team up that you wouldn't normally see. Like, of course the Air Chicago group, like that makes sense, but just like some of the people on that airborne team, grouping up, you wouldn't normally see together,
Sure. Yeah.
And, just stuff like that was really fun. Even towards the end of this issue 273, just that moment, like it's all about to go down, like those 4 last panels, like that moment was fun. But when you boil it down, Snake Eyes gets grabbed,
Gets rescued.
He gets rescued, and it takes 10 issues to do that. I was like, well.
Yeah, it sort of felt a little bit like the ending was relatively abrupt, that maybe there was a little bit more to do with all of those characters once they'd been brought together, that maybe that point could last a little bit longer perhaps, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it was wrapped up in a bow.
Yeah, there was kind
sure.
of, I remember feeling by issue 3 especially, I was kind of like, when is this going to pick up? And because I kind of figured, like, if we're going to introduce everybody, like, when's that going to happen? And I was just kind of curious. And then especially when we got to like 273, I'm like, this is going to wrap up in 2 issues? Like, whoa. Where's it going to go? And I was like, okay, well, they're just getting out. And I certainly didn't know that issue 275 was going to be oversized or a silent issue or not have paneled storytelling.
Yeah, so at what point did you find out about that?
So we got, well, of course, with COVID, I had just turned in that page, 273. So that page, it's funny I point out that last page of 273. Not my favorite page. That was a bit goofy.
The last page.
I'm not too prideful to say it. It's fine.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's
all right.
Well, it's I don't know why you're picking on that poor page.
Well, because I had to turn it in the afternoon.
Okay.
It's because I finished page 18, I think, and IDW said, all right, everybody pencils down. And we're like, whoa, because with COVID and everybody was locking down, Diamond stopped, they shut their doors, the distributors, to send out books. And IDW is like, well, if we can't get books shipped, then we can't guarantee when books will be sold. So then we can't guarantee that we can continue paying people. And until we know these things, like, we don't want anybody producing more stuff. And I was like, I literally have 2 more pages. Please, like, let me just finish these 2 pages. And they said, they're like, well, if you can get it done by the end of the workday, then yes. But we just, company policy, we just can't, logistically. And then so I was like, all right, burn in the oil. So this is like Thursday night. And then they're like, well, you have to have it done by the end of the workday Friday. I was like, 3 pages by tomorrow. Let's do it. So I got 273 done because literally I didn't know when. Nobody knew anything, back then.
Sure.
Like when anything was going to happen again. So from it was in April, I guess, early April, they said pencils down, nobody work on anything. I got those last 2 pages turned in under the gun. And then we were waiting. And I was like, does Larry happen to have the script for 275? I was like, I promise I won't turn in any finished pages, but oh my gosh, I'm on a groove. I felt really pumped because I just cranked out 3 pages. I'm like, if I could get a start on this, we could actually finally get ahead of the schedule instead of being behind the schedule.
Yeah. Could have been an opportunity in disguise, right?
I know. I was like, nobody else is working. Please, let me work. And they're like, no, he doesn't. And I was like, oh man. And then so Netho, he didn't have a script to work on. I didn't have a script to work on. And so we were waiting. And then it wasn't until June that they said, all right, guys, let's pick it up again. And so then I was waiting on the script. So Netho got his script, and then he started on 274. And then I got my script 2 days later. I was like, whoa, man, he must have. It's like he must have been really burning the midnight oil. Get this done. All right. And then I looked at my script and I was like, what? Because it was literally 30 pages of 1-sentence descriptions. And they're like, oh, Robert, you're going to be so excited. You get 30 splash pages, 31 panel illustrations. And I was like, what? And they goes, and it's going to be a silent issue. Dun, dun.
Okay. It was a silent issue at the script stage.
Yeah.
So it wasn't after the event of going, you know what? We don't actually need to add speech.
Yeah. So if famously, issue 21, the silent issue, Larry does like to tell the story that it was kind of because of production that they were under the gun. He did all the layouts, pretty tight layouts, and sent it to the inker. they didn't have time to send it to the letterer or for him to script it out, and so they just sent it to the colorist and got it printed. And now, to his absolute credit, it's a phenomenal issue, and to his credit and his ability to tell a story visually, it's incredibly clear and a wonderful story, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But also incredibly appropriate, because you have a silent character infiltrating as stealthily as possible.
Yeah.
A base to get somebody out as quietly as possible. Like, so perfect setting for a silent issue.
Yeah.
And
as I recall, part 10 wasn't particularly silent.
I know, we have an all-out battle, multiple commands being yelled, explosions, city streets, exploding. So I got this script, and to be honest, so I got it in like late June, and now this is where I dropped the ball, is just because I've never had such a challenge in my career, like artistically, to wrap my head around, how just to logistically tell the story of all of these moving pieces with like literally well over 100 characters and in all of these different set pieces with only one panel per page to get the point across. Now, some pages were a bit easier than others, and some pages were more fun than others, to be honest. A few that come to mind, just some of the hallway pages where you had Snake Eyes and the Arashikage group, and that combined roof infiltration group, taking out Cobra Commander and all the Vipers as they passed by. Those were fun melee shots to do. When they come out the front doors and you see this really cool kind of epic, landscape shot of the, or not landscape, but just you see the landscape of the battle in front of the community center there. I liked doing that one. And when they come in and they're almost as a wave, they kind of help save Roadblock and the Command Suburban, from being overrun. Right. Some of those moments I really enjoyed. But then there was other moments where it just made, in my opinion, it just really didn't make a lot of sense for it to be a splash page. And it would have been so much smoother to have a few panels to set up, have a climax and payoff, some kind of resolution within the storytelling. So it was just tough. And to be honest, it left a few strange cliffhangers without having dialogue. You have major characters like Laura 343 who makes a bit of a strange decision that isn't explained. And so we don't know yet.
We don't. Or hopefully he'll pick up on it, and
so I do
find
hope
out,
so.
Right?
If she survived, which I would expect, it does say in the script that she kind of dives out of the way. But then the entire, she throws a grenade, so she kind of turns on the other CGs, Crimson Guards and stuff. You see her empathize with Snake Eyes a bit throughout the whole capture and his ability, and he does a bit of ninja voodoo on her a bit.
And then
with his hand
fingers,
gestures and things. She's like, ooh, and then she gets knocked out.
Yeah.
But then and she kind of gets shot, or takes an injury, and of course he shows a bit of care for her. But right before that, Cobra Commander says, get him, and she's like, I'll do it, and so it's strange. She just makes such an abrupt turn as a character. So I'm curious to see how that will get developed. As a fan, I'm just like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So I'm really interested. But then so she kind of turns on the Crimson Guard, throws a grenade. That's right when they notice the whole place is laced with C4 up in the ceilings. The grenade goes off, which sets off the C4, which explodes out, the street level, because this is all happening in the sub-basement.
Okay, so that's the big explosion page.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm glad I'm here to give commentary and explain that.
Yeah, I must admit, I wasn't completely sure what kind of how that explosion connected to the rest of the story.
I know, yeah, because see, that's why comics normally are a combination of prose and visuals.
Yeah.
I know, it's just, it needs that written explanation at times, or at least a couple panels to set up that chain reaction.
As you say, that if you had the couple of beats before it, it would you'd have the leap. But yeah, it's almost it's almost like telling an entire comic on a couple of pages, because you'd normally have, I don't know, it depends, doesn't it? But you might have up to 9 or so, panels on a page at most.
Yeah.
And so you could tell almost the equivalent number of within 3 pages, almost the same as you could with just splashes. So you've got it's a decision, I guess, of which particular snapshot you're showing without the connective tissue between the two that you would normally have between the panels, right?
And then you're just trusting based on, this is why it was so hard to wrap my head around it. And I think some pages I was more successful at than others. I think if there's a failure, it's, I do the best I can, but I just, I think there are times where maybe I didn't have the best solution. I second guess it constantly, but she throws the grenade. And so I'm just thinking compositionally, we see where the grenade comes from. I think, it's after the fact, the grenade's bouncing towards you. She's jumping away. So I want to show that potentially down the road, she could survive potentially, because she's not in the middle of the blast, right? And then as the grenade's bouncing at you, visually you follow up the body of the Crimson Guard who's pointing up at the ceiling. So it gives you at least something to look at. And then how do you draw blocks of C4? So I'm trying to show, something that is pretty nondescript. A block of C4 is the most boring thing to look at. I'm trying to show blocks of some kind of armed, explosive with wires and stuff going in it. And I'm just hoping that somebody sees those details and that compositionally, with somebody pointing right at it, look at that thing.
He's pointing up at the ceiling. Next page, there's the top of a building exploding, which is...
Yeah, but that's the only thing you have to connect the two. And it's a bit of a jump.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's all I can do. That's what was in the script. That's all I can do visually. And so I'm just sitting here agonizing over this for about a month. And I took so that's honestly what put 275 behind. It was me. That was on me. And I'll take full blame for that. But it was hard. It was the hardest thing I've done in my career, was trying to wrap my head around how to solve that problem, that challenge. So I got about 20. Well, and the other thing too is that was the only issue I drew full size. So previous to that, I had drawn everything smaller, and I was like, oh my gosh, if I have to draw 30 people on this page, I'm not going to do that, 1-to-1 size. And to be honest too, these were, if I'm drawing 30 splash pages, or at this point 20 splash pages, I would just want to be able to have them and see them full size or whatever. So
I guess I'm betting that there was a lot of collectors clamoring to try and buy them. Are they still with you, or have they've been sold?
I do have them. I sent them. I do have an art agent now, so I sent them over to my art agent. So there's a couple that I think I'm probably going to hang on to, because honestly, all my art from my previous runs have all sold. All the covers for this run I sold before I did them.
Oh wow!
Somebody said, "Are you doing covers for this run?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "I want to buy all of them." I was like, "What?"
Wow!
So I was able just to throw out a price, and he was like, "All right, great. I want all of them." I'm like, "Oh, geez, I should have charged more."
You should have said more, yeah.
I know. So that's not how you negotiate. Dang it. Yeah. So I wanted to have a commodity there. Obviously I wanted to draw them full size. And
so if someone wants to buy one of your pages, one of the listeners, where do they go?
So there's moregreatart.com or MGA, and so Mike Alexander, he is the guy who handles a lot of my art. Probably eventually I'll end up running commissions and things through him too, because that's to be honest, that's another thing that I'm not awesome at, which I'm sure you could talk to Chief about. So it's just
that's right. So you'll have heard him moaning about you in the last episode.
Oh yeah, he's got every right to moan about it. Yeah. So but at any rate, so yeah, more great art. But yeah, so a lot of my old art from the old G.I. Joe series was sold, and so there's a couple pages I wanted to keep just to kind of have for myself, and but for the most part, those pages are up there. And but so we got, it was good. I kept saying, I was like, look, I'm more than happy to split these pages and just to get it done on time. And they're like, no, we'd really like you to do it yourself. And I was like, well, I would too, but here's the reality is this is an insane issue. But I went ahead and did all the layouts, and then it just got to the point where like, look, we're just going to go ahead and give Netho, the last 10 pages that I had laid out.
I think it's almost not like a nice synchronicity as well, in terms of the fact that the project was a joint effort between the two artists, and then that final conclusion is also a joint effort because of that fact. It's not jarring.
Yeah, I mean, if they had gotten somebody else, it might have been a bit strange, or even the cutoff point. We had kind of wrapped up Sean getting out of the community center and being out there, and really what Netho came in to do was kind of just the exfiltration from, just literally just pulling people out, and that worked out fine as far as a break in the story. So it all worked out fine to kind of wrap it up, but it was whew, man, when it was done, I was just like, oh my gosh, what a way to
when I was thinking about the questions to ask you, one of them was going to be, the splash page issue, the fact that it is just effectively a single panel per page. Does that make it much easier to draw? But clearly not.
Oh my gosh. I think it has its place, and I love a good splash page for impact. But when every page is an impact, you lose that special moment, and it becomes a poster book,
Sure.
Especially when there's no dialogue. So I don't really know. It's interesting. It was in theory, maybe it's a good experiment. I haven't talked to Larry about it. I don't know if it was just so he could wrap up the event and move on to something else, if it was because we had pencils down for 2 months and it was a way to get back on track. For him, at least. For me, it put me behind, quite a bit. I think it put the series behind as a result. But I don't think it's now. Well, it's funny because I was on another podcast. I was on Star Joe's talking about it with Brian Shearer, and
okay,
it was at least the two of us. But we were talking about it because he was working on issue 276, the Law and Order issue.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, as I was working on, he was working on 277. That's right. So Netho got 276 when I was working on 275. Right.
Wow.
So I was doing 275. It was taking me forever. Netho finished 276 and they're like, hey, can you come on and help Robert with 275? He's taking a while. And Netho was like, yeah, I can do that. And then Brian Shearer got 277 and was almost done with 277. I was like, I cannot let Brian finish 277 before I finish 275. So I turned in my last page of 275, and then I think like 3 days later, Brian finished 277. And I was like,
very good.
So at least they had a couple in the bag.
So they were building up. They were somehow able to build up a little bit of a buffer. Unfortunately, it wasn't 10 issues earlier for you.
Oh gosh, I know. Yeah, it was just all on my back, and I was like, I don't mind taking the blame. I'll take the blame. That's okay. I'm not too big of a man to do that. I was like, I'll hold my hands up. It's okay.
And do you think it's scratched or torn away at your itch enough to be drawing the G.I. Joe characters now that you're happy to give it a break for a while, or do you think you'd like to get back on a G.I. Joe book to do something again someday?
That's a good question. It's funny. I think what I definitely learned from it, and I think what IDW learned from it, is I'm not going to do a monthly book. I think with me teaching full time, that's just the logistics of it. I mean, I absolutely love teaching. That was I love drawing comics. I mean, that was certainly a dream of mine. But even when I went to school because I got a degree in sequential art, so even when I was in school, it was with the ultimate goal to teach. It's just I've always wanted to teach.
Okay.
And so I knew when I was in school that I loved the collegiate experience, but I wanted experience in the industry first, to be able to know the inner workings of how it was done and production and how to market yourself and how to set up at conventions and, all those kinds of things. Sure. I wanted to live it, before I taught it. So now that I'm teaching, like I thoroughly enjoy that. That obviously offers me a bit of, financial stability. And so now when I do comics, I do it because I love it. I'm only going to work on projects that I think are fun and something I love. Now, G.I. Joe, as stressful as that whole project was, I still am really glad I got to do it. Like the whole time I was still just loving I got to be a part of the project again and the property. And sure enough, like last month, I did send IDW an email saying like, here's actually a couple other proposed ideas we have. So I was talking with Chad Bowers, who is kind of working on Snake Eyes Dead Game with Rob Liefeld.
He's a friend of the show, because he's come on with Chief a couple of times now.
Oh, great. Yeah. So Chad is awesome. I've set up with him at a couple of conventions, and he just has phenomenal ideas. He has such a love for the property. He's so well versed in the lore, and he had some phenomenal ideas. So we wanted to run those by IDW just to get their thoughts. And whether it was with me as an artist or not, we were just kind of pitching that just to kind of get it in front of them, which I'm perfectly fine not being the artist on it, but just to kind of get it in front of them with the idea that if I was going to be attached in any way, that, again, potentially, like I think there's room in the market and within the property to do some kind of a biannual or annual book, like a standalone 40-page, like self-contained adventure. I think that would be a lot of fun. And we could get a rotating group of artists or just short 10 to 12-page anthology stories. There's a lot of fun things that we could do that don't have to be bogged down with like decades of story, but feel like they could fit into any one of, the stories that we've read. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would be all for that. I would get so excited to draw, and I could easily fit that into my schedule. That then we wouldn't have, the monthly deadline, the solicitations kind of hanging over us, and expectations of people wondering where the book is or any of that. So we could just kind of do it, and then when it's done, then they solicit it, and then people can be like, "Oh, that's fun," and pick it up and be excited about it.
Sure. Sounds like a nice concept.
Yeah. So that kind of thing I would absolutely love to do, but obviously, so given my current situation, that would be the only way I could kind of see me doing that.
That, or given enough lead time to get a whole issue done. But I think with the G.I. Joe artists coming on board, I think there's a bit of a learning curve in terms of how you cope with sort of get used to the characters, how you interpret them, how you deal with maybe as many cast members there are on a page. And so the fact that you're so accomplished and got all of the experience under your belt should mean that you can just hit the ground running, do an issue and get it out the way, and it not be jarring or sort of preventative of that learning curve, I guess.
I do think that even with back in 276, like it really felt like I was just kind of putting on an old pair of running shoes. It was just kind of like, oh, this feels great. As soon as I got to draw like Clutch and Rock and Roll, and I was like, oh yeah, this is fun. Just even though on those initial first pages, I had to get those couple strange pages of that tiny robot slicing a rat in half. That was my very first page, and I was like, what? Yeah. And then drawing some, G.I. Joe's throwing around a weird sandwich, but after that, I was kind of like, okay, well, this is G.I. Joe, I guess.
Yeah, what's G.I. Joe if you can't devote half your issue to people talking about sandwiches, for goodness sake. That's what it's known for.
Oh, man, it's all part of it. I tell you.
Very good. I had a few random questions about Snake Hunt specifically that cropped up as I was reading it, particularly with our sort of deeper dives on the issues that we've been discussing. So do you have the inside track of the October Guards in terms of their appearance back from the dead and then eventually being revealed to be some sort of android, which I think the reveal was in one of the issues that you drew, where we see Horror Show being opened up. Do you have some of the inside scoop about that? Was that something relatively intentional, or was that a retcon that was introduced after the fact that they had been introduced?
No, I was probably just as surprised as everybody. I was like, first I was excited to get to draw the October Guard, and then when Horror Show starts like acting up, and then he sends off, who does he send off to go get ice or something?
It's Diana and Dragunov, is it? Yeah,
Dragunov. He sends them off. He's like, go get ice. And then they run off. And then he opens up the chest plate like it's some 80s TV show. And that's all kind of described in the script. That this is kind of how he accesses it. He pulls out a little fuse, that's like a revanch, kind of like component, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, what is going on? I wasn't. So I was not caught up with like why or how. And I was like, okay, so I really don't. It's just kind of what was in the scripts. He doesn't really allude to like where it's going.
Yeah.
You kind of just draw what's on the page and then assume it's going to come back up later. Yeah. So I wish I could give you more info, but it was really, So that was kind of my thought process. First, I was excited to draw them, and then I was like, what? And then I'm with everybody else, just kind of wondering when it's going to come back around,
Yeah, I mean, I'd hope that he's laying down the foundations of a future story where we can fill in the blanks and get it properly explained. I'm willing to forgive most things if you can come up with a plausible explanation for it. So I'll sort of give things a pass and try and be forgiving and what's the expression? I can't think of it now. But yeah, think the best of it, I guess.
Oh, sure.
In terms of there'll be an explanation for this that will come along. And Larry often plays the long game where things take some time, even some years sometimes to properly play through. But I look forward to it because that original October Guard was quite the classic team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a shame to lose them originally when they were killed off from the universe. I think there is some potential good stories in there if he does sort of continue down that
mm-hmm.
route. In that same sequence, I think Brekov appeared at the door when he answered Crystal Ball delivering his pizza, and he was in some Python patrol gear, which was, I don't know if it was explained. I sort of got my own no prize in my brain that he's been disguising himself as a cobra to snoop around and get intel. But was that the description on the script, that he was disguised as a Python patrol cobra trooper or something?
What issue was that again?
269.
Oh, 269. I do remember that he did say, because I wouldn't have drawn that uniform if it wasn't in there. I mean, I'm just gonna say, like, if I drew him in the Python
Mm-hmm.
patrol outfit, I wouldn't have just done that arbitrarily. So that was definitely in the script. I cannot remember if there was a written reason why, but yeah, that seems like a very arbitrary, strange thing to be wearing and answer the door with it. Like, why would you answer the door with that on?
Well, I guess if they're in Springfield, everyone's Cobra, right? So it shouldn't be too jarring.
That's true.
From that perspective, even less conspicuous being in a Cobra costume potentially than being in civvies.
Yeah, sorry, no help.
No worries. Do you have your own theories on Horror Show? What he is? Do you think he's a robot or a reanimated dead Horror Show?
No, yeah,
like that?
I do think he is a full robot.
Oh, right.
But I don't know that they all are.
Uh-huh.
So, because if it's, how aware they are, you know what I mean? I wonder if it's only Breck off the nose.
Could be.
Because he sent the other two off, but maybe it's just those two who don't. I thought that was a very specific plot point. He sends Diana and Dragunov off, right? Horror Show seems oblivious, but that's him too. So
yeah, I guess the point about the two that he sent off were they were the two that never died, so potentially don't know the full story about that, because who knows the tale that they've been spun about why they're back.
Yeah. So I mean, I think he's probably got ideas of where he wants to go with that, which would make sense. And so I think there's an interesting little arc to be told there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but I do think that they working with the whole Alpha and Revanche and all that is some deal that was made.
Yeah,
I think that he's like some kind of fully animated kind of a android or something. AI.
Okay. So I'm getting onto the really specifics. There was another a question from a guy on the a friend of the show, Steve Jubber, who sort of made a point about the Aspid helicopters, and noted that a lot of the artists seem to be following a look of the sort of the unofficial toys that have been made of that design of the helicopter, rather than perhaps the original Aspid helicopter as introduced way back at the beginning of the run, and was famously worked on by Michael Golden in Yearbook and so on. Just out of curiosity, what was the reference that you used for interpreting the aspid that cropped up quite a lot in those first couple of issues of Snake Hunt?
I think so. That was right at the end of 270 or 267, right? And then most of 268, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there was just an image that Larry embedded in the script of 267 of that style of helicopter. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't so much that it was listed specifically based on the toy, as much as Larry mentioned in the script, this style of helicopter comes down and carries the his tank away, right? Carries
Sure.
his tanks. And then I think I was like, that reminds me of the toys, right? And so I think I did some kind of amalgamation of the reference he sent and of the toy.
Okay.
So I wasn't trying to be 100% accurate to either. And then I think Netho kind of did his own thing as well. So
Sure.
I don't even think
I'm
Netho
looking
was
back on it, I see
strictly-
that you probably didn't illustrate the aspid quite as much as I thought you did.
Yeah. So I think I was, yeah. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Here's another really super detailed one, that there was a Pyro Viper introduced, which was a new character, which I think was based on the Red Shadow, Red Torches figure. Is that right? Or is that way too detailed a question for you to remember off the top of your head?
Man, I've never had such a deep dive interview before. This is you're going in.
Yeah, this is I'm only asking these questions because these are the next issues we're discussing
sure,
on the
yeah,
podcast,
yeah.
so it's so fresh in my mind after looking at it in such detail.
Oh, I will tell you what. So on 269 page, yeah. So page 1, that kind of aspid's kind of dropping his tank in, and even then, it was interesting. I was trying to keep the community center a certain design, and between me and Netho, this place looked different every issue. I was like, dang it. And then on page 3, one of the only revisions I got from Hasbro was that they thought I defined Laura 343's butt too much on that bottom right hand page.
Yeah.
And then they're like, so they told the colorist to go in and adjust it, and he just wiped it out,
smooth
so
out
it just
her
looks
butt.
like a flat butt. I was like, it wasn't gratuitous or anything. It was just she's walking, but whatever.
Did you say this was the only revision for just that page, or the entire issue?
No, I think the entire issue. I was like, what?
Oh
Seriously?
my word!
Anyway,
Crikey.
So then, the hander, all the weapons. Okay, so the pyro. Okay, cool. So he's at the door, opening the door. Yeah, and he even mentions them, Pyro Vipers. The entire corridor is guarded by Heat Vipers, Pyro Vipers, Frag Vipers. Okay, so this whole time, he was Larry was mostly having us draw mostly the Heat Vipers and Frag Vipers.
Sure.
Night Vipers, some Techno Vipers and stuff. I think that was generally the crowd. But the idea too was I was kind of just excited about drawing as many Vipers as I could find and stick them in there. And so I think I randomly just drew that Pyro Viper in, and then I think because he saw that in there, he was like, who's this guy? And then and then wrote it into the dialogue. I think that's what happened there. I don't think that he wrote that onto the script initially, as much as I just kind of threw an extra Viper in there, but then you never see him again. So
So that was your design, do you think?
yeah, I think I just kind
Viper.
of added that in. And then it was colored that way too. So
That's fascinating because it almost exactly aligns to this very niche character that was introduced in the Red Shadows, which was a pyro trooper.
yeah, I think that's kind of what happened. So we're often we'll either see a name of a character in the script, and we don't get some catalog of reference. We're on our own devices to try and find reference. So we're often scouring online or based on our own level of knowledge of who these characters are. I can't imagine how anybody who isn't some kind of fan of G.I. Joe would even handle this book. And I'm in no way have an encyclopedic knowledge of the characters, but so I use resources like 3D Joe's or Yojo or other websites that have these extensive libraries. But even then, there's so many variations that inevitably I've drawn the wrong version or some exclusive version, or stuff like that before without realizing it. And then I get called out and I'm like, well, there you go. So, something like that can sneak through too and just be an arbitrary like accident. But, and then, so if it's that niche, like sometimes it's on purpose because I want to throw an Easter egg in there. And sometimes it's just totally on accident because that happened to be the reference I found. And I thought I was doing it correctly and might have accidentally done it incorrectly.
Interesting. And all of the characters that did have to be dropped in here, the original guest claim was that every living G.I. Joe member would be included. Do you know how close to that initial description it was actually achieved?
No, and I think I was a bit disappointed because I remember when that claim was kind of made when they mentioned to me, hey, do you want to come on board? This is the event. This is what we want to do. And that was kind of a sales pitch to me. I was like, yeah, let's do it. I was kind of pumped. I wasn't literally going through and having a master list and checking them off. You might be, but I haven't. But
I did start.
Did you? Awesome. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see how well we did, but I don't know. But I never once heard from editors or from Larry or anybody like how we were doing or if that was actually going to happen. Never once did I hear after that initial invite to work on the book that ever mentioned again. So I think they quickly wanted to forget it because they realized how big of a deal that's a huge promise. Like, that's a big deal.
It's such an enormous cast and task indeed. Yeah. But I think it's near impossible to achieve unless they're they're working from a complete list to begin with and ticking them off and figuring out and then mopping up all of the remainders who didn't see any time on a bit one big crouch scene at the very end or something. Yeah.
I think they wanted scenes like, even in this issue, like where you do in Utah, where you have that kind of pit scene in the, a bit of where all the vehicles are.
Yeah.
We're able to kind of throw in a few in the background, but then that kind of backfired.
Oops, yeah.
Quickly. So, they might have things like that, but then you had the issue that Netho did where they're all kind of lined up to kind of say, hey, we're willing to go,
Yeah.
And then Larry wasn't happy with that because it was, I think you had Roadblock maybe right up front and a couple other characters, I forget exactly who, but real nice and big, real close. And of course, as an artist, that allows you to fill a lot of space. And then a whole trail of people going off into the background. And I think Larry, it was still in his mind at that point that like, hey, we want to get screen time for all these characters. And we're like, you can't.
It's not possible.
That's not possible. And it's to be honest, a boring shot because that means everybody's a medium-sized character. If you have somebody who's large in the foreground, that immediately takes up a ton of space, and so you have a limited amount of space remaining to fit everybody else in. And inevitably, that if you have somebody huge in the foreground, you have to have somebody tiny in the background, or you have no depth of field, right? You have no depth going on. So he obviously realized that he's an artist himself, and he was like, well, I think he kind of just gave up at that point and put everybody on a bus, and we were like, oh, dang it.
Yeah, if you're not in the bus, then you're not one of the living Joes. Oh dear. Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Yeah, I was especially after listening to your recent episode, I did want to kind of sit in on some of your guys' kind of banter and talk, and certainly, I mean, if you guys have any criticism for me, I'm more than willing to take it. I'm sure you got an impression of the kind of person I am. I certainly don't mind. I give it to myself enough, but it's just interesting to kind of go through the issues and kind of think through, just to get a bit of that commentary. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Almost like a bit of a creator or DVD commentary, I guess, as you could say. Choices that were made or things that were pointed out or things that were in the script that I kind of deal with or little mistakes that were made. Like, for example, in 275, I think it's page 5, when it's an overhead shot. This was another thing I had to deal with where we had all of these big action scenes, and occasionally I had to just zoom out to kind of let the reader see the landscape of what's going on, because otherwise everything's in your face and you kind of don't get a sense of the environment. And it was when all the vehicles are pulling in, kind of creating this little kind of encircled area. Yeah. And the command...
We've got a couple of buses and the bongo van and a couple of the transporters.
Right. They're all kind of creating a little protective circle. And the command Suburban's right in the middle. And in the script, it says that Hawk and Duke are climbing out onto the top of the Command Suburban, and Roadblock gets out the back. And I draw them as tiny little figures doing that. It gets inked,
Right.
but it gets colored as Cobra Troopers.
Oops, yeah.
And I didn't see that until, like, they send out a PDF after every issue. They send it out, and they say, all right, does anybody see anything that needs corrected or whatever? Everybody on the team gives it a once-over, typically. We all missed it. Everybody missed it. The editors missed it. Everybody. And then it goes to print. And then after the trade paperback gets ready to be sent out, everybody goes through everything all over again. I was like, wait a minute. They're not supposed to be colored blue. Like, that's supposed to be Hawk and Duke and Roadblock getting out of that van. And my editor, Tom, was like, well, he's like, it's a bit too late for the single issue, but we can recolor it. And so sure enough, like, it'll be recolored and corrected for the collector.
So the trade, that one we'd fix for the trade.
That one thing. We missed everything else. But
there have been worse instances. I know there was a panel, I think it was S.L. Gallant and Gary Erskine, that somehow along the process some Joes had been, I think it must have been a quick and loose figure in the background, probably quite a small figure drawn and possibly loosely, and when it must have been in the inking stage, it was tightened up into completely the wrong characters. It was meant to be some Joes, and it was Cobra Commander and some other Cobras, I think, in the end that appeared on the page and made absolutely no sense from the storyteller's perspective. But so yeah, I think that one was a little bit more striking.
Yeah, a little more obvious.
I wonder how many people. Yeah, I mean, you knew who was meant to be there,
right?
So you could obviously spot it more easily. But I think because you don't have necessarily, as we're talking about, as many visual clues on some of the pages, it's less obvious as to what should have been happening there, perhaps.
The one benefit. That's the one.
Yeah, I see the next page actually. It's you've got then Duke and Hawk on the roof.
Yeah, that's like a page or two later. Yeah.
Okay, so that makes more sense now.
Oh no.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have any sort of more sort of behind the hidden magic curtain stories about the whole process that you can think of?
Oh, I thought it was interesting in 273 when Sean, it full on says in the script that Sean jumps out and like blows the kneecaps out of Mindbender and Cobra Commander. And as I read that, I was like, what? Oh my gosh. So I full on drew him like just getting capped, like both those guys, like, and in the art, like they take it. You know what I mean? And then like the next issue or the 2 pages later, Mindbender's grimacing and he's like, I just got grazed. I'm like, he's got no knee left. I'm like, what? He's like, I just got a graze, but I think the commander got the full kneecapping. I'm like, his knee's a mess. And I'm like,
oh dear.
That was one interesting thing where in the initial script, like it said, like they both take it, and I was like,
okay.
He scaled it back in the script after the fact in the dialogue.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then in the when I got the script for 275, Mindbender's like pushing the gurney around that that Cobra Commander's on. And I'm like, how's he walking around on that busted kneecap? I was like, because I didn't have
just a graze.
I didn't have the printed 273 yet. You know what I mean? I didn't know.
Right.
So that was one. That was another one there. Like, there's times where, I'll go back and read through these, and I was like, what? Dialogue will switch up on me. I mean, inevitably with any book, it's interesting. Yeah. Again, if you go to, as a penciler, this always happens. It just happens. I read the story, and it's just part of the process. I think it's probably like this for just about any job, honestly, but. If you can see my pencils, and they won't look drastically different, but everything's collaborative. You do your part of the process and you hand it off. And there's a lot of times where the people you work with will embellish your work and add to it, and either through clarity or, especially with the coloring, like it adds depth and separation, and special effects obviously kind of add to the mood, and which is really great. And then and then also. And not to take away from any of those steps, I really love the people I got to collaborate with. But I also just generally like just the look of, penciled line art, just because there's a nuance to that kind of part of the process.
That translation from pencil to ink, you convey so much more nuance in the grade, in the grades of pressure, etc., that are applied in the pencil that necessarily have to be sacrificed when it's being inked, right?
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. Like in the rendering, when you look at the inked pages, even the colored inked pages, you're looking at the inker's interpretation of the pencils. You're never quite getting a sense of the penciler's, direct vision. Like you get a sense of their storytelling for sure. That's their job ultimately. You know what I mean? But yeah, so it is. That's why I do like always kind of seeing, when they kind of pare it down and you can get like a black and white version of a comic, or you can see on somebody's process blog or Instagram account or something like that, and you can kind of see maybe some of that initial interpretation too. So
yeah, I mean your pencils, as we talked about, very precise, very technical, so possibly a little less sort of decision making involved from an inker's perspective there, but some pencils I've seen have been like, how on earth is an inker meant to begin on interpreting this? It's just, there's pencil all over the page. Where do you draw the line in terms of the interpreting what to black out and what not to? So there's the finest inkers in the business. They've got when they're working over that kind of work, it's a hell of a skill and definitely loads of room for interpreting a very different outcome as well because of the choices they're making. It's an interesting part of the process.
Yeah, and it's so I think it was interesting. Still, I've been kind of working in comics. Like some of the very first comics I worked on was G.I. Joe related, which I'm always kind of happy that I got to work on something like this. Now, of course, it's I look back on it now, and obviously you grow, you get better you hope you get better, throughout your career. But
well, I mean, you started out 2005, so that's 15-ish years ago now. So it's I can't, if I try and remember what I was doing 15 years ago, it's sort of in terms of the work I was doing, I mean, it's all a massive blur. Crikey.
I know, yeah, and it's what's interesting is that you'll go to a convention and it's like if anybody could get their hands on anything you did professionally 15 years ago and bring it up to you and have you sign it and have you answer for it face to face.
True.
and you're like, all right, but not to take away from it. I don't sit here, as much as I recognize it for the fact that I grew from it. I don't just full on cringe at it because, at the same time, I just recognize it as something I grew from. I'm still learning. I'm not the best artist in the world. I'm still trying to get better, but it's still somebody enjoys that story, and I don't want to take away from the fact that they enjoy that story. So I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh, this is garbage. I drew this 15 years ago. Somebody is handing me that to sign it because they like it. I'm not going to sit here and bash it. So anyway, so I do my best to respect that, but it is an interesting position to be put in. Like as soon as you put your work out there, like you answer for it as long as people hang on to it, and bring it up to you.
Yeah, and as a younger artist, you did that early work was still very strong and definitely just as good as any of the peers of the time, and particularly that G.I. Joe run that started with Chuck Dixon in 2008. That was a very solid run, and I noted that I made this connection. I think I might have even mentioned it on the last podcast. You're one of the G.I. Joe artists where it just seems a completely natural fit and almost came fully formed, hitting the ground running in much the same way that Rod Wiggum did. And I noticed that actually you'd referenced that in a previous interview that he was one of the G.I. Joe kind artist icons that you admired.
Yeah, definitely his work, especially as far as interior stuff, and kind of Michael Golden too, in regards to like covers and his work on Joe, just because I tend to have as detailed as I do get on minor kind of surface details, I still feel my work is a bit cartoony, and so I do think it kind of lends itself well to something like G.I. Joe, obviously kind of rooted in action figures, the cartoon and the comic, like all together, from its inception. And so you have different people who are fans of G.I. Joe that come from those three different worlds, right? They either grew up on the action figures, or they grew up seeing the comic, or they grew up seeing the cartoon. and obviously there's crossover, but I really thoroughly enjoy the detail. I enjoy trying to draw things like they work, right? So so the fact that the buckles actually buckle and that things snap and that the guns, not that they have to look hyper realistic, but just that they look like they could function or you could hold them. They don't look like made up, weapons. And to be honest, as much as I thought I drew realistic guns, it wasn't until I went and worked right after I think it was in 2013 or 14, I actually got hired by the U.S. Army.
Right.
To draw a book called America's Army. And my editor was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. It was the best paid job I've ever had.
Crikey.
Where I was paid hourly to draw
U.S. military defense budget.
I know, exactly. I was like, it was kind of phenomenal, to be honest. Like, I had to answer 3 questions for my job interview. He said, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" I was like, "Oh, yeah." I was like, I didn't realize that was pertinent, but I guess, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm a U.S. citizen. He goes, "Are you a high school graduate?" I'm like, "Yeah, I have a master's degree. Like, I went to college." He goes, "Okay, that's fine, but I need to know, did you graduate high school?" I was like, "Yes, of course I did." And he goes, "Are you willing to take a drug test?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." Okay. Like, do I have to go to boot camp? Like, I just need to draw this comic book. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so.
And he asked if you were a communist.
I know, exactly. Yeah. Do I have to take a polygraph test?
And then you had to do 50 push-ups followed by a 20-mile run with rocks on your back.
And so I got to work on this thing, and it was oh my gosh, like if I didn't have people's like the pockets, the stitches correct on the pockets of the shirts, and the actual weapons had to be, oh my gosh, so exact that I had so many revisions on that project. It took 8 months to draw 3 issues, and which they were just paying me hourly, and they didn't seem to care. They just wanted to make sure it was right. I was like, okay. So they just revision after revision, panel after panel.
Oh my God.
That was insane. And then that was probably the first art job I've ever got laid off from. I wasn't like fired, but it just, the job disappeared because of some bill that was passed in the Senate. I was like, okay. They're like, it's just budget cuts, and then I guess the government doesn't need to make comics anymore. I was like, okay, that makes sense. There's probably better ways to spend this money. So
right.
Anyway, but so I thought,
and I guess the idea behind it was that it was kind of like a recruitment tool to make the army look cool. Yeah,
I know. So IDW, I think, was their publishing, distribution resource, but it was a free comic, and then they would put it out in like recruitment offices, and they would send it out to U.S. troops and high schools and stuff like that. But yeah, it paid really well. So I mean, I was obviously chosen to do that because of the work I had done on G.I. Joe, and it was, to be honest, the early IDW Joe stuff I thoroughly enjoyed. It was really fun to kind of do our interpretation of G.I. Joe. That was a lot of fun. It was just a really fun part of my career. I think the most fun I had was when we launched the Snake Eyes series with Chuck Dixon, and issues 1 through 4, and then I think I came back and did, I guess it was 1 through 4, and then we were always alternating arcs back then.
Yeah.
I did the second arc, and then maybe that was it, or the third or something. But I think issues 11 through 14 or somewhere in there. I think that was probably the most fun I had on the series. That was some of my favorite issues, and I still look back on some of those pages, and I just I was really happy with some of that work that I was doing. And then so I was writing that 2011 through 2013. Like, that was just a real sweet spot that I enjoyed the property a lot, and I still just really enjoy that.
Excellent. Yeah, I think at some point I'll do some sort of read through of some of the earlier IDW continuity work, and maybe cover it in some form of podcast. So it'd be great to get back and maybe have a bit more of a detailed chat about that, as much as you can remember some of that.
Yeah, well, there's some stories from back then. And one thing I do like about you guys' podcast is how quickly you review stuff. Because there's some kind of review podcasts I've listened to before where they can get a little bogged down in the plot and the details. And man, you guys are like zip, zip, zip. And I was like, well, you really get the point out and you tell the story, but I like that you kind of get it across and move on.
Yeah, well, I mean, and we figured that if you want to actually read the story itself, then the best way of doing that is getting the comic in front of you and actually reading it. You don't need us retelling it, so it's more than that we can acquaint everyone with what the story is basically about, what's covered from a plot point of view, and then we can sort of then cover some of the fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. yeah.
Cool. So I have taken up a load of your time. I think 2 hours into this chat, so it's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun, and you've been a great guest. So I think I'll release you back into the wild and to do all of the things that you're meant to have been doing today, and have been waylaid from. Was there anything else you wanted to cover? Is there anything that you want to promote? Let people know where they can find you.
Mostly it's just a lot of the work I post is usually kind of in progress stuff on Robert Atkins Art, either on Instagram or on Twitter. Occasionally, I might post just some random images on my old blog, but mostly it's that. As far as projects coming up, I am doing a lot of like concept art for video games, just kind of on the side, but it's and I can't often show a lot of that, unfortunately. As far as comic book stuff, there's a few projects I'll be having coming up through. There's a new publisher called Clover Press, which is kind of an offshoot of IDW, and as soon as I can talk more about that, then I'd love to. But it's anybody who's a fan of like the action adventure stuff of G.I. Joe, I think would enjoy the story. So as soon as we can tell more about it, I'll kind of send you some more info. But
cool.
So
and I think some of your work can be found on some upcoming toys as well for the Valorverse. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's been a lot of fun to work on. So he's doing a series of figures and comics called Action Force, not strictly tied into the old Action Force property, but yeah. So that's been a lot of fun. So there's a lot of covers, and then he's putting out comics based on those figures. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can definitely find that as well.
Cool. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there then, and thank you very much for being such a great guest. It was great to chat to you.
Yeah, you as well. It's anytime. I'm more than happy to talk with you guys.
So you can find Talking Joe in all of the normal places, over on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And when all's said and done, you can catch us down the road, because we've been Talking Joe, and we're all out of Joes, and also all out of Robert Atkins.
No more. All out.